This conversatorio, as I said, is not a discussion panel because to me that's a little intimidating, but it's like a talk between friends, colleagues, camaradas, compañeras, and Deo has a long history of working with Esperanza in different capacities, mostly as an educator, and I will let Deo to tell you more about herself, including that she's from the Dominican Republic. And then each of our panelists will introduce themselves. Thank you so much for coming and for being here with us. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. Welcome, bienvenidos, everybody. It is an honor for me to facilitate this conversation on these remarkable young artists and activists. When Yadira contacted me and asked me to moderate, I thought, like, what me? Should I be am I the right person because I'm an immigrant? And so I feel that I'm a latecomer to LA in the sense that by the time I arrived here, I had been in the United States for many, many years. I had lived in other cities. But interestingly, LA has been the city where I stayed the longest. I've been all over, and it's also been the place where I dared, as an immigrant, to say my community, our community. The first time that I said it. So, in approaching these exhibits and this conversation, I thought, what are the ways in which the topics that Janina shared with me and that I could see through the biographies and what I gathered about your work, how did those topics intersected with me and the person that I am, right? An immigrant from the Caribbean, who's Latina and also Black, who remains an alien in this country, right? I still feel very much like I am not home. And so what does that mean to make it home and to have a community and to connect with community? I think I have an interesting perspective that other people in the community, I'm sure, have an immigrant. But I also have 2 young daughters that are artists too. So I thought, like, and I talked to my daughters and I said, like, if you were in a conversation with community members, what would you like to be asked? What do you think is important? Things like that. So I did question the different ways in which I approach community art resistance, like my whole history and who I am and what I bring. I am trained in several of the social sciences, always in pursuit of how to best confront social injustice. So I am trained in psychology, anthropology, sociology, and now lately linguistics, critical linguistics. And in terms of my work, I worked as a researcher, as a social researcher. I worked as an adult educator. I worked as a counselor. And most importantly, I think that in that position of outsider that an immigrant is, I've been invited to mediate relationships of inequality according to gender, according to race, and according to class now in my last experience. So I hope that all of that prepares me to have a conversation where, as we said, in my conversation with Yadira, we gather, we gradually pull out all the meaningful things that you bring in the way that you have related to South Central LA. Mm-hmm. Like, what does that mean? Community art, resistance, all of that. So that's what I hope we can talk about today. And the first thing I wanted to ask is that everybody introduce themselves. Maybe we can even have somebody from the public, but beginning here, and you share your name, your pronouns. Let me see, your name, your pronouns. Your age, your occupation, what you think it's important for us to know. We have the biographies, but a little summary. And then, what would you rather be doing right now? If you weren't here on this beautiful day, tell us the truth. What would you rather be? Where would you be? If you didn't have to be here, okay? And if it's in South Central LA, you can give us an idea of what you would be doing now.
And if y'all could actually pull the mic and use them close to your
You go ahead. Oh, she's from Mascot. I was looking at you, but.
Hey everybody, my name is Taylor. I asked for by Taylor Lindsay. That's actually my stage name. My government name is Taylor Harrison. My dad would appreciate that. And I run the Plant Plug. The Plant Plug is actually a gardening miniature landscaping business. Forefront, always lead with plant education, botany, ethnobotany, and it's my favorite cultural tie-ins to the food we eat, from the local vendors to why do we have black eyed peas every New Year's. So I run a small nursery in South Central off of Florence, Vermont, and I'm also an entrepreneur. I have multiple businesses. I teach financial literacy for free to anybody that wants to learn investing, even real estate, what have you. Because once I find something that's free, I want to make it freer. So that's what I do. I'm 35. I just turned 35, 2 weeks ago? I know, I'm surprised too. Thank you. And, I just want to be a part of and hopefully a pillar of this community. And I love connecting people, whether it's parties, community events, or us all meeting up in the garden having tea. Multiple meetings of tea. So that's what I do, and I love what I do. What would I rather be doing, or what would I be doing? What I'd rather be
If you wouldn't be here, yeah.
Okay. So I twisted my ankle 2 weeks ago, actually a week ago. So I should be sleeping, but because I don't really listen to the doctor's orders sometimes, I've just been wanting to be in the club and dancing. I love funk. I love 2001 parties, just things like that. I would be in the club if there was a day party. I'd love that. I'd love to be in bed by 9 now. And that's what I'd rather be. But I was at the garden today pulling these plants. Thank y'all for letting me display my plants here today. It's my personal collection. And I just love to tend to them. Yeah, they talk to me. They're like, hang out with us sometime. So I haven't been there much in my own garden, but that's where my heart is right now, in the garden. And the garden is actually at my parents' house. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, we have
Yes,
some here.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So do you want me to hold it? Hi everyone. Well, I just want to say thank you to the organizers for the event, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here, as well as the family and friends who made it out today on this beautiful Saturday. My name is Zuli Juarez, born and raised in South Central, currently live at Huntington Park. I have roots in Huehuetenango, Guatemala. That's where my family is from. A little bit about myself, she, her, hers. I am 29 years old, and I have been doing a lot over the last 10, 15 years. I've been doing a lot of environmental justice and health work in South Central and Los Angeles area, and most recently in my position, I now do national federal work. So I've escalated just the level and the scale, but it's all rooted in the work and my experiences here in South Central. I'm also a cultural curator, and I'm involved in one of the co-founders of La Comunidad Ishim, and we're a collective of Guatemalan and Maya people who do work, cultural events and programming here around the indigenous migrant communities, specifically Guatemala Maya identities. I think for us, there's actually a really large population here in South Central, but I think as indigenous communities in the larger Latinx communities, I think sometimes that's invisibilized and there's a lot of assimilation. So I think in my own process of being able to grow up in South Central, very diverse communities, tying both what the land and the environment mean for indigenous communities in particular. A little bit more about myself. I did my undergrad at UC Berkeley. I did ethnic studies and gender women studies, and I recently graduated from UCLA in my master's in urban and regional planning. So I think very much of my approach is looking at our environment, our landscapes, and how we can create healthier communities in that. So I've worked in EJ, environmental justice communities, both like nonprofit, academic research, as well as like urban planning, landscape, and some of that work as well. So I'm really happy to be here, and it's good to see all you.
What would you be doing if you weren't here?
It's a beautiful day today. I think it's like 80 degrees. I love the beach, so I would probably be at the beach, listening to music, maybe like a little mixed up fruit, listening, just hanging out. I think that's what
Ooh. Hello, everyone. Hi. My name is Celestial Moreno Luz. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I just want to thank you all for just sharing about yourselves and the work you do. And also, it's kind of surreal how, yes, we're all here, but at the same time, we also have like our plant kin, our plant siblings sitting with us. And I think that's important because when we think about our relationship to the land, and sort of what land we're on, right? This is indigenous land. Particularly, I want to recognize that we're on Tongva territory and the Luiseño Band of Indians. And so I just think it's beautiful that we have the opportunity to, on International Women's Day celebration, to celebrate our lives, but also interconnect with plants that are from all around the world. And so, again, my name is Celestial. I pronounce her, she, her, ella, and I am a multidisciplinary artist that focuses on archiving histories, herstories, queer stories of LGBTQIA plus people. My roots really come from South Central Los Angeles, but I think as I've grown and I've developed, I've really been interested in how do we connect our movements in a transnational lens. And so in the past couple of years, I've really been working with people in Mexico, particularly like in La Ciudad de Mexico, Oaxaca, and Tijuana. And so yes, I'm from South Central, but I also like to think that like my heart is everywhere, and that my community really transcends borders. I come from a background of art community making, and so in the past decade, I participated in social actions here in Los Angeles, as well as cultivating relationships and connecting people like my comrade Taylor here, particularly connecting LGBTQI plus people of color. I'm a woman of trans experience, and so it's really important for me to just recognize that, because I do have a particular privilege in not necessarily always being read as a trans woman. And so I think that's important because there's a safety in that. And one of the reasons why my relationship with people in Mexico is so important is because Mexico is the country with the second largest amount of trans femicides. And so it's really important for me to be just very present in who I am as a person, as well as very present in like the struggles of the people that I exist with. My specialty in art is photography. I love videography, and I also do poetry. And if I weren't here right now, I'd actually be helping my friend plan her brother's birthday party, who is also a trans woman. And so I come from a background of community building, art making, right? And also like my mom, she kind of like also sold a lot of home interior, kind of like as a way to supplement us as children. And so I've always really been into this idea of like creating a fantasy. So if I wasn't here, I'd probably be helping her create that fantasy. And yeah, it's about me. No, I'm a Scorpio.
Thank you very much. So the first thing we wanted to explore was what is community? What is community? What does it feel like? How do we define it? And I thought that we would talk about geography because we're talking about South Central, right? So in that way we are localized, but you connect to communities outside of the United States. You as the child of immigrants, you because of the way that you're thinking about your work and your awareness of your work. And you did mention that your community felt like it was an international community. But I think that it is important that we then think about what makes, like when we make those decisions to claim a place like you have and even devote yourselves to it like you have, or to connect beyond that geographic area. What are we thinking? What are we looking for? What does community give us? What does it ask from us? What would you say? How can this conversation and this exhibit illuminate this idea of community for all of us?
Yeah. So the thing that crosses my mind when you speak of that, I'm still learning what that means, because I've been in LA my entire life. And I've only been to Mexico and Louisiana. And I feel as if in Los Angeles, it's absolutely falsified what community is. From the amount of transplants that come, I'm talking about people within the states that think LA should be a certain way, to me struggling to find who I was within Los Angeles. I've been in South Central for most of my life. Nonetheless, when I go north of Wilshire, I'm nobody. So I feel as though we're right on the brink. That's the whole Renaissance thing. And it's very exciting for me because I wake up sometimes like, why am I doing everything I'm doing? I love what I do, but I'm tired. Nonetheless, and I'm sure y'all are tired too. Nonetheless, I strongly believe in the power of connectivity, and especially with knowing where we came from. And unfortunately, a lot of African Americans and Black folks don't have. I guess I don't want to call it the luxury or the privilege. If somebody could give me the word, we don't know where we came from. Like I can't tell you what culture my African side of my family is from. I just can't tell you. I would love to know. I just found out about African food. It's amazing. Nonetheless, just to have that connectivity. The biggest part, though, which I'm trying to create, is a hub, especially in South Central. I'm from the Vermont corridor. I didn't even know what that is. And now people call it SOLA. Please don't call South Central that. And nonetheless, that's a sign of gentrification to me when we start abbreviating everything. Nonetheless, just creating those hubs, somewhere where we can all go. Where's the meeting spot? Where's the happening? Daytime, nighttime. You know, whether it's a forum where we can all speak like this, somewhere where we all go get food, a mercado, a market, what have you, a community garden, things like that don't exist in South Central. So it's wild because there are these borders, but it's a matter of perception, right? And it's a matter of exclusivity. And I was shown that all the opportunity was Northwest. Everybody still to this day commutes Northwest to get a job out there. And I'm still learning to this day in my mid-30s, and I'm so excited to see what's on the other side. So community to me is solely connection, and what that's going to look like, you know, because I live for the fantasy, is just developing that. You know, we may be in the trenches now, but that connection that's being created, like a fine nervous system or the roots of a plant. Mm-hmm. That's what community is slowly growing to. I want y'all to show me what's community, because I have no idea. But we're all here to help each other, hopefully, and that's what community is to me, if I have to give a definition.
Great, thank you so much. So much, I appreciate it. Everything to clap. You know, in the nonprofit world, for example, we talk a lot about community, building community, serving the community. And I appreciate it that you brought up this idea that community is something we make. Like, and not in the sense that it's our responsibility to make it, but in the sense that it's contingent. Like it happens as we connect. Like it happens here, it happens in the hub, right? Like when we come together and we connect, then we are creating community in that act, right? I think that's a really great way to think about it. What about the other?
I think when I think community or just having that sense of belonging, I feel like as humans, we definitely want to connect with folks. But I would say it's a shared experience, whether that be food, a shared interest, whether that be a certain activity, a certain group of folks coming together. Specifically in how I think about community, I think about immigrant communities, I think about my family, and what does it mean to come to a new place. And, you know, whether you know the language or not, whether you know folks, I think building that sense of community is not that it comes natural, but it's in a way you have to, right? Because whether you have kids, you need someone to be like, hey, are your kids going that way? Like, I want to, you know, figure out how we can manage to do this. So I think within, especially the working class community, immigrant community in South Central, like those things are necessary because there is a lack of resources. There is a lack of, whether it be open spaces, to be able to get folks to come together. But I definitely reflect on that of like immigrant communities, of my family, of my parents. And I think in particular with the work that I do, I think being Guatemalan in a what's predominantly Mexican community, it's like once in a while I meet another person who's like, oh, you're also Guatemalan, or you're such American, that's cool. So I think as I got older, I was longing for more of like folks who can connect with like, you know, the fact that my family at home, like Spanish, it's not the primary language, right? Like we speak indigenous, like when we go to my aunt's house and my grandma's or like visit family, it was our indigenous language and it was quite Spanish. So when I would meet other Guatemalans, they'll be like, oh yeah, my family speaks English. You know, it was just a common shared experience. So once we started finding like more and more folks with similar identities, then we started a collective. It was literally just a group of friends coming together, like, hey, let's have lunch. And then we brought photos of our family and we started sharing with each other. And we're like, we should do this often. Like, this feels nice, you know? And just being able to stay rooted in, like, again, thinking about the diaspora and, like, what does it mean to be born here but not really know your homeland, Or what does it mean to be born here and have that disconnection? And what does that mean for our families? So I think for me, thinking of a community, one key thing is intergenerational like conversation. So bring in your grandma, bring in your parent, bring in those older folks and younger folks, and have a conversation about what kind of community we are creating and making sure it's inclusive to everyone.
So more like creating a thread, like a legacy, right, of an identity that then can be passed on and can ground us because we are nevertheless in our foreign land, at least I feel that way, right? So I don't think that is something we as immigrants can avoid, having to negotiate that, right?
Definitely been creating spaces that, as we're getting older, that we would have loved to see when we were younger. And I think it's that, like, feeding our child, like inspirations and, like, aspirations.
Questions,
Yeah.
cravings.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes with, like, what would younger me would have enjoyed and creating those platforms and those spaces for me.
And I believe there are pros and cons to that being shifted, to that being displaced, to that being in the move intergenerational. Do you agree? That, it's like if you compare a child who went to the same school all their lives. So that child has that very strong sense of belonging, everything is clear, but probably the child doesn't have the same capacity to encompass, to include all their experiences that are very different. And I think one advantage of being the child of an immigrant is precisely that you're like a comet. You have that long tail, right, that stretches beyond then South LA, because there is this other world that is kind of part of who we are, right? Like I find strength in that. What about you?
I keep thinking of creating hubs, like you mentioned, and then you're mentioning connectivity, and I think, and you mentioned the thread, and all these things are important. And I'm also wondering, if we have a knit tight community in South Central, and maybe if there isn't enough resources, it's like where then does the community access a resource that maybe does not exist? And so I think it's important that as community, like, we find ways to decentralize our movement so that we're everywhere versus just in one space. And that's what I keep hearing, right? Like, me having kinship and friendships with people who may not necessarily be in the same space as me, but when we connect, it becomes like this beautiful, connective, wonderful space of healing. And so community for me, I think, it's very complex, only because you brought up the nonprofit complex and how we keep talking about the word community, and then you said we may not be responsible for creating community. And at the same time, I think about how, like, well, I actually do feel responsibility to create community. And so I do feel that there's a responsibility to create community, because girls like me didn't have community growing up. And so where am I lacking to create those spaces for community if I don't pick up the responsibility? But I also think that I also feel, and unfortunately I don't necessarily see it all the time, but I also think that community also needs to be responsible as well. And I don't think necessarily we're always talking about that. I think that we see community workers like all of us, and then we have a responsibility to serve community, and we do it in a way that's not self-serving. However, we have needs, and we have requirements to fulfill our desires, our ability to rest, and community doesn't always see that. And so I think about how then, like, can we work with community in a way that prioritizes our rest and prioritizes our healing, that isn't always so only serving them? And I say that because I've seen it, I've experienced it. I've experienced the burnout. I've experienced community members thinking that all I am is a resource when I'm more than that. And I see community members more than just someone who needs resources. So I think that, like, community for me is a sense of responsibility, a sense of accountability, a sense of recognizing each other's humanity, but also as a site of healing, because if I didn't have community members to uplift me in my most tumultuous times, then I might not be here. So I do think that South Central, particularly, like I met some of my most long-lasting relationships in South Central. And without me being from South Central, I don't know if I would be the person I am today. And so I owe a lot to just like myself and my community as well.
Yeah. And I do appreciate that you bring up the idea that the community at some point becomes a collective that is accountable then to each individual, right? So that we are accountable to that whole, to that collective, however we are imagining it or realizing it or making it be, but also that the idea is that the collective sees each one of us as individuals and as part of it, so that they have to be. And I think that's been, the lack of that understanding has been very clear with COVID right now, right, with the pandemic. I think that a lot of the struggles that we have is because we haven't been able to articulate a relationship between ourselves and the collective in which we take care of each other. Like we have. I appreciate that.
Technical issue, it's hard to hear in the back, and you use the mic.
Oh, of course, thank you. But I wanted to know if there was anybody in the audience who wanted to share what community is to you. So it doesn't stay between us, even like one or two people that would like to, like, when you hear us talking about community and you hear connectivity and you hear kind of like legacy, right, and tradition and connection to our roots and being rooted, and you hear having responsibilities to each other, right, between community members and to the collective. Anything that we missed or that you think, even like if you looked at the exhibit and you have an idea or you know the artists that we have here, anything people want to share? Yes, please.
Community to me means protection, but it means like me protecting it means like me or us, we protecting folks that have different struggles than us. For example, like someone said they're Guatemalan. So when I was in school, I took a class all about Guatemala. So I'm very aware of like indigenous folks. So like if I hear someone that's Guatemalan say, oh, like why do you do this or do that? I'm like, well, we do that because of this. Like just like protecting folks sometimes from themselves and other people. Like so if someone has a different if I'm able-bodied and someone is not, like how am I stepping up and making sure that they are supported and then vice versa?
Yes, excellent. Because we know each other and we know all each other. Right? And so we are able to see that. Yes.
And forcing ourselves to learn, like
Exactly.
you know, it's being uncomfortable.
Yes, absolutely. You know, when I had the opportunity to do intercultural communication classes, you know, the first thing that I say is ask questions, right? Like ask questions, like, you know, we just met. So I should ask some questions instead of assuming things, right? And so that is now on me to seek to know, right? Because again, this awareness that we are a collective and we're connected. Anybody else? Yes.
I don't really have it's something that I'm still exploring, and I'm really curious as to what the panel thinks about this, but I think the word community plays on a lot of different ideas, right? There's the unity aspect, there's communion, there's communication. But we live in a capitalist society, right? And so like in capitalism, because you have to commodify or sell yourself in order to get basic needs and resources, how do you sediment communion, community, communication in a place that kind of morphs you into someone who feels compelled to be commodity?
Wow. Thank you so much. Yes.
You read my mind. I was actually sitting here, I was listening to everybody, please, but I can talk to you. I was thinking, if I didn't start a social media account, which drives me nuts, by the way, as well, I have 5, and also my phone, and then my phone, and then also if I didn't create a business out of gardening, you know, commodify every single expense, you know, inventory, get the LLC and all that, would people know my name? And I don't want to cry because I'm wearing mascara, but it stresses me out to know how many people walk among us with immense talent that shouldn't be forced to monetize their talent. I mean, shouldn't be forced to. I respect higher learning at the utmost, but take on some of those debts that come with it to get the title. Like I lost a coveted position that I really wanted, that I didn't know I wanted because I didn't have credentials. Like I'm not allowed to teach in some spaces because I don't have credentials, but I have 30 years of experience. It doesn't matter. So I was just thinking about that. Thank you for bringing that up because I usually say don't hate the player, hate the game when it comes to a lot of the work I do because it can be very, very frustrating. But also some people are introverted. Some people have social anxieties. I could talk all day if you guys want me to. I can do stand up if you need me to. But people don't really have that in them. But they have so much to give, and they feel afraid to put that out there because they're not the social media influencer with the 90,000, 900 million views getting corporate endorsements and things like that. So thank you for bringing that up. I question myself so much now. I'm just like, I'm not my brand, but if I didn't have a brand, would I feel seen? Will I be heard? I'll be honest with you, I may not be sitting here right now, but because of the community and because I got to meet some lovely individuals in the audience, they referred me to be here. And that's what community does. So it's just like, it's both sides though. It's like, it's the yin and yang of it though. Because you guys, I'm on 68 in Vermont and they're on 66 in Vermont. So I just walk down the street, like, can I get some lemonade? They're like, you want to be a museum exhibit? I'm like, okay. That's not how it happened, but just to sum it up, you want some free produce and some EV rebates? Okay. But just, that's community. But at the same time, on the other side of things, when I do other public outreach, I know I wouldn't be there if I wasn't a business. And it's exhausting being a business because it takes away my humanity.
I actually wanted to contribute to that because, it is very unfortunate, but also sad and frustrating that we have to contribute in this capitalist society. I mean, I come from a background where my friends and I did things that may not be in line with capitalism, right? And that being said, I think that where I'm at right now, right, Celestial has connections, is the program manager for a nonprofit organization called Reach LA. It is my responsibility as someone who has monetized off of my work in grassroots movements that is now in the nonprofit industrial complex to create opportunities for my community members to access, right? Like I'm not going to sit at my organization and just not create and generate resources for my communities. In 2021, it was like my mission to try and allocate at least like $5,000 to communities through art programmings. And that's what I did because I had a mission and I knew that because I was in this realm, I was going to resource all of this education, all of this experience I had and put it back into my communities. So I think that's what I come back to being responsible of one another. And it's like, if I have the access to this resource and I'm intertwined with community members who have the talent, I can just generate and push the resources to them, right? Like I don't need to have everything for me at this point anymore because I've already monetized off of something that essentially people are struggling to do. So I think that as people who are in these positions of power, I'm just going to call it for what it is, it's important to reimagine how then to redistribute your wealth, redistribute your power, and just give folks the opportunity to thrive. And so I kind of just wanted to contribute to that because it is exhausting. It's exhausting trying to brand yourself and make yourself palatable in a way that like sells because we deserve to like have access to food without thinking about where am I gonna get my next gig from to buy this food. Yeah.
Just a reminder.
Just a reminder before I intervene that at 3 we're going to change the group.
20 minutes.
20 minutes about, but briefly, community for me too, it stretches through the years and through the struggles with other women that have come before us and have fought, great fights for women's rights. And here in the United States, International Women's Day hasn't been celebrated in the way that in other countries, especially in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, is celebrated. It's remembering that International Women's Day came about because of the struggle for women's rights. And it was born, some of those dates were born here in the United States. And it began it began with some events in 1800s, in the late 1800s. But in 1908, there were women in a strike in New York. In a factory, there was a fire, and a factory broke out. The women were there, and 129 women died. And the following day, the Socialist Party declared that we should have a International Women's Day in honor of these women. And then the following year, there was a gathering of about 100 women in Copenhagen, in Europe. And they also saw the necessity for women's struggle and to unite worldwide, because at that point, a lot of countries were not allowing women to vote. And that was one of the early struggles of the women's movement, is the suffragio, the right to vote. And then later, much later, it was not until the 1970s, that the UN declared International Women's Day. But here in the United States has becoming a little trivial, where, it's just about exchanging flowers and chocolates and congratulations. But that history of a struggle has been left out. And so I do feel a connection, a communal connection with those women who came and have been struggling for 100 years before us for women's rights. And so I think that's part of also, of course, feeling a community. It's just a long stretch of connection with women in the struggle.
A long connection with struggle, and I was thinking that kind of the way I summed up your comment was like, how can community happen within capitalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was that, like, how can we maintain relationships of connectivity in a society that pushes us to be exactly the opposite? And how do we maintain that history of struggle and the gains of that struggle in a society that tends to depoliticize everything, right? And how is that politicization, what you guys are talking about as cultural workers, as I would call you, having to commodify yourselves to contribute to have that exchange with the community, now mediated by social media and lives and all that stuff, right? So I think that's the remaining question. You started with that. Like, I don't even know what is the definition of community, right? And so we are left with the question and the challenge to continue to build community, even though we live in a society that kind of denies what will be the main characteristics of what connecting through struggle, connecting through a legacy, finding meaning in sharing resources and all that stuff. But the other thing we wanted to talk about a little bit, now that we know that we don't have that much time, is art and resistance, and art as resistance, right? So we know that you have been involved in different artistic projects, and for me, I want you to know, I'm an educator. I think my education is my art, right? So then what you do in terms of connecting with plants and teaching us about plants and all of that, which is inspiring and edifying to us, is art, right? So how about that? We were just starting to talk about struggle in politics and commodification, but we know that we live in a society that also says that art and politics are two different things, and stay in your lane and all of that. Like, how have you thought of your art as politics, as resistance? Did you?
I kind of, it's funny that you said stay in your lane, only because, I think art doesn't always necessarily need to be political, in the context that, like, some people just paint, for example. I'm just putting something random. Like, paint because they feel a struggle within themselves, and then they use art as a way to heal, right? But then is that not political? Because you're using art as a way to, like, heal the ways that the world makes you feel. And so, like, sure, maybe art is political, maybe art is not political, but personally, art has been a vehicle of politicization for me. And it's funny that you use the word like, oh, some of us are told to stay in your lane, but I've actually told a group of people to stay in their lane. I was when I was studying at the university, there was a group of trust fund students like making like a cinematography piece around like a sex worker, and I just sat there the whole time like, okay, right, and everyone was like, this is amazing, I don't know what, blah blah blah, and I just sat there. I was like, do y'all even know sex workers?
Right.
And they all just stayed quiet. They didn't say anything. They were like, no. I'm like, well, then y'all need to stay in your lane. Like, you're making, Hollywood has essentially contributed to a culture where you can just commodify and appropriate everything around you based on just based on aesthetics. And you can't do that. We can't do it. We can't. It's just the way that like even like Latinx people appropriate Black culture. Like, no. Just know that doesn't belong to you. And so I think of how like art, unfortunately, maybe fortunately, art does tend to be political in everything you do. I think for me, the reason why I started even creating art was through self-portraiture. I mentioned earlier that like photography was my specialty. And so I used to take photos of myself and think like, oh, this isn't going anywhere. This is just like very vain. But then as I started growing, I was like, no, this is important. It's important because then like how are folks around me going to see how I've transformed as a person, and even me giving me the opportunity to self-reflect. So I used to think of like self-portraiture work as something that's vain, but actually it's something that immortalizes myself and lets me remember where I've come from and where I am now. And so I think that art tends to always be political, whether or not we agree.
Definitely. I think art is so important in any movement, in any community. I think of storytelling. I think of art, whether that be through painting or photography or even oral histories, and the art of sharing stories with each other. I think when it came to the collective, we were doing programs, we were doing film, we were doing hosting film, we were hosting film, movies, and getting guest speakers. And for ourselves, we were thinking, what can we create to kind of leave that kind of either documentation or art story? So we actually decided to do a children's coloring book. We were just like, we're all adults, but we were like, let's do a children's coloring book. Let's kind of feed into like what kind of stories we want to create. So it took us it was a collective of like 6 folks. It took us many years. It took us about 10 years to kind of just get the story. We'll come in and out and read, and sometimes not me. But it's called Colors of Guatemala, The Adventures of Gabby. So we created this protagonist, Gabby, and they, they're tiny like child, and they're growing up. They live with their grandparents and their brother, and Gabby has these like dreams of like this other world, or of like crossing, of like the coyote, of like a village, and Gabby thinks they're dreams, and Grandma's like, no, they're not dreams. This is something you experience. And we created this book that kind of invites people to have conversations about whether that's migration or whether that's the Civil War, something as heavy as the Civil War and genocide that happened in Guatemala. Like, how can we create those stories that we can invite not only parents, but also children into this conversation, to know that these things have happened, this is who we are as people, this is how, like invite some of those conversations. So I think for us, we took the power of storytelling, of like this imaginary person who actually, like everything about Gabby reflects everything, like someone in the collective, like all of us together are Gabby, and somehow put our stories together. But I think deciding to do a coloring book was just like, oh, like that makes so much sense. Like we can use it as like, in addition to the story, it also has activities in different like Maya languages, and it also has like poetry, things to kind of have the reader kind of ask about their identity, their question, their history. It mentions like a portrait of Rigoberta Menchú and who she is. So I think for us, like that book is really what connected us to a larger like theme of like inviting folks to do art, but also inviting folks to have those conversations. And I think for us, like again, the art of oral history and storytelling, it was really, really what we wanted to contribute. And the book, although we haven't met because of COVID and all things are hard to organize events, but the book lives on. Like people are still like sharing their books at schools. People are there was a deportation here in Long Beach, and they were asking for kids, like a lot of folks who are from Central America, specifically Guatemala, and they were asking, we need toys, we need books, we need things for the children. And we're like, we have a book. It's just true. We went to go drop off like loads of books to the detention center. And it's so unfortunate, right, that they're experiencing this in it, but adds to the context of it as well. So I think for us, we chose the art of oral storytelling to do some of that work.
It's interesting because my background in education is actually personal training, and it's body composition, and I love body modification. I'm covering tattoos and all this, but that was my art initially, and I really want gardening to be my art again. It's my job right now, and I'm not really fond of that. But I have a love for it. We're gonna get there. Nonetheless, the fact that I lead with education when it comes to selling a plant is so radical to people, because you go to Home Depot, you're so lost, nobody can help you, and nobody cares. And next thing you know, you're buying another plant, and then you believe that you can't grow your own food anymore. And that's a really dark seed to sow, because I know I gave up on it multiple times when I was younger. And I believe in balance and cultural tie-ins, and just to have that power of education. So it's funny, I don't have credentials, but my art would be education and also storytelling too. And not creating landscapes. I don't like grass. Don't ever ask me to plant and water your grass. I hate it. I will rip it out of your house. It actually has roots in white supremacy. The Times did a story on it. It's really interesting. Salt the earth. You can't grow anything. Good luck. So just creating that connectivity and reigniting the desire with all ages to grow, because a friend of mine told me that enslaved Africans were the first forced farmers of America. And that's why generationally people don't do it anymore, because there's deep-seated trauma that we may not experience in our life, in this time frame, but generations before, if you believe in past lives, that stuff comes up. And like you were talking about the dreams, were real experiences, how do we know that haven't happened? And just to get people reconnected with that. And in other countries, their stores are stocked with what grows in season. If you go to Europe and ask for broccoli in summer, they're like, you're tripping. We don't have that. It's not in season right now. Here, everything's the same every time you go to the grocery store. Why is that? So just connecting people with that, resetting their palates. It's funny, because when I got into all the plants and everything, I realized how much of a social, economic, political issue it became, that we don't control our food. If you control the food, you control the people. And if you control the seed, you control the world. So that's what my art is. It's education. And I try to make things that seem really mundane and boring, because people don't like to read. I remember that time in my life. I actually read a piece on how the school system taught us how to hate learning. The pipeline, preschool to prison pipeline thing, all that. You either play basketball to get out of the hood or sell drugs. That's all you're going to be able to do. And I will read something, I'll read a story, and I just love telling the story over and over again, especially when it comes to gardening, to bring that to life. And it's really simple for me, and I'm glad that I'm able to do it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So what I got was self-expression, right? A medium for kind of graphic, regional, global, historic abuse, and then kind of reclaiming activities that were taken away from people through oppression and colonialism and all of that. So I just want to emphasize that I do believe that there's no such thing as anything that we do being not political, right? Like, politics is about relationships, it's about the distribution of resources, it's about all of that. So what do we do that is not? So I appreciate that you had such specific and powerful ways to talk about how art and politics come together in your work. Again, want to give people a quick opportunity if anybody would like to add to that conversation about art and politics. It was impressive how for our guests, our panelists, is such a simple and clear connection, and yet again we live in a society where that is not necessarily seen as such. And when you were talking about staying in your lane and you talked about the way that you challenged some people that were appropriating a specific type of experience, of life experience or identity, I think that there is a difference when we are told to limit our humanity because we are not credentialed in an area and we are told to stay in your lane. I think what you were doing there was challenging some people being objectified. And I think that at the center of all types of oppression, that's what it is. You have to objectify people. You have to dehumanize them in order to oppress them. And so even in these very trivial ways, something like Hollywood is reproducing oppression because people are being dehumanized and objectified. So I think it's to be, and I think we should, in cases like that, say stay in your lane rather than even kind of
Thank you for that.
Yes, yes. But like I said, we have a few minutes before we change. And the last question that we had was about like what kind of, I think you already alluded to that because when you came, you started talking about the meaning of this project for you, all of it, right? Like the fact that you, through this project, had connected with each other, had known each other. So we wanted to get at that in the end, that kind of like what are the products of our labor and what are the ways in which going after you, finding you, bringing you here so the community knows you is something that you feel that has kind of built on the work that you're doing already, maybe help you with your need to be seen. I don't know, what do you guys say about this experience in particular? How does it fit in what you've been doing and the challenges you face, or that the community faces?
For me, the whole purpose of the plant plug, which I spoke before, is just having that hub and that connectivity. And that's exactly what this exhibit did. So thank you all for doing this. This is incredible. Just the connectivity, and also, like you said before, once you have that power, knowing that you provide the resources, you can do it for other people. And so if you're a candle maker, I'm a shoemaker, and you need some shoes, I need some candles. My whole purpose in my work is to create systems of barter, trusted systems of barter. And every one of us has the power to do that here. If I need a wedding shot, I don't know if anybody wants to marry me. There's people here. If I need some children's books, we can switch. If you want some plants, if you like the selection, we can trade, and that can combat capitalism. It's going to take a defunding process. It's not so black and white. There's a lot of gray matter, but just backing that up, and that's what the plant plug is all about. The plant plug is a facet of what I do. It's not who I am, but this exhibit and this panel, everything down to the molecule, is exactly what I hope to embody with the work that I do. It all started with one plant. Now look at it. We're all here. Bam.
So alternative ways of relating to each other, different things we pay attention to and are important to us, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that I do is really just me doing work to come home to myself. Like in that process, I build community because I know there's other people that are going through that as well, right? I think it's like what are my interests, like what makes me feel whole? And doing this project with friends and also just the work that I do, it's kind of feeding in that. But what I love is that I'm able to plug in with people and their interests. So I think for me, being part of this exhibit in particular is not only being able to highlight the work that I've been involved in and that, it's open doors and opportunities for other folks, but also thinking like, what are the amazing things that other folks are doing? How can we get plugged in as well? And I think in the natural, like we as a group, we didn't expect for our events. I remember we did a screening once and there was over 150 people there. We did not, we expected like 20 people. There's a need for it. And sometimes, with the culture of productivity, of having to work or having to always be doing something, we sometimes don't take the time to think about what makes us whole. Like what is home to us? What are those things that our passion, things that we love? So I think in the process, you get to meet folks, and I think it's such a privilege for me to be able to curate events or just programming that bring people together. I know people are, like you said, we live in a capitalist society. People are working. People have 2 jobs. They don't have time to think about like what kind of community we want to, it's such a privilege to be able to do that. So I think with us and the resources that us as a collective have, being able to create those spaces where people can just walk in and connect with each other and find that, because I know folks don't have the courage to do so. So I think that's
Thank you.
That is so difficult to just sort of even unpack for me, only because I'm always transforming, right? I think like even participating in this space has given me kind of like the ability to open up a little bit more and think about how do we interconnect one another in ways that just like let us heal, you know? And thank you all for sharing your brilliant expertise within your own works, because it's really important. And I think if I were to maybe think about how then will I connect more with community, or how can I continue co-nurturing, right? Because I'm not the person with all the solutions, and I'm not the person that can sow all the seeds, right? So I think like how then can I contribute to a climate where we can build together would really just be going back to what I talked about earlier, just redistributing the resources that I have, and maybe even also just giving the power to folks to create the resources, right? Like, I don't know, I'm sure some folks in here have heard of like community advisory boards, right? But they really do work, you know? Like they give folks the opportunity to like, hey, what would you like to see here? If I have a resource, let's not even say resources, if I have the money, right? Like if I have the funds to do something, then like what makes everyone think, or what makes me think that I have the answers to a solution solely? So I think like I would also like to co-contribute to ways of how our healing operates within our communities, and how then we become more sustainable interdependently with one another.
Thank you so much. I want to end with a quote. You know, the last words that you guys said, you talked about recognition, recognizing ourselves in each other. You talked about no, sorry, that was you. You talked about home, about coming home, and about co-ownership now, right? So, but we need to create those spaces to do that, and we need to establish alternative relationships, like I said. So I want to read this quick quote from, it's a poet that I follow on Twitter, and she has she once tweeted this. She said, recalling Bell Hooks, whom we lost recently, on Malcolm X, how the solitude of prison was, in a cruel irony, the first time where he and others could just sit, think, read. How difficult it is to carve out community-centered spaces for intellectual life outside academia, right? And so I think this is what it is. It's like we learn, we develop empirical knowledge. We learn from ourselves. This is community knowledge. When you guys in that trajectory of developing that book, and as members of the community, what you found now belongs to everybody, as you said, right? To everybody in the community that can do it. The knowledge about plants, the whole experience that has been you kind of asserting yourself in society enriches us all. And we thank you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would invite now Jasmine, Macario, and Sakia to come to the front. And there are three of our participants in the exhibit, the retratos
Again, it's an honor to me to be asked to be the facilitator of the conversation between you and our community. And you heard the questions that we asked everybody. We had 3 themes out of the exhibit to explore what community was, the encounter, the intersection between arts and politics, and finally, how is everything that you do as cultural workers something that builds community knowledge, that builds all of us, right? So those are the 3 themes, and we have some specific questions here, but let's start by you presenting yourselves again and telling people what you think people should know. And also, what would you be doing if you weren't here right now? You want to start?
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Zakia Brisker. I don't have preferred pronouns. I am the co-captain of the South Central Run Club. And the main thing I want people to know about me is that I'm really dedicated to exploring how we can create world peace in real time. That's it.
Is it on? Is the mic on?
I gotta repeat this.
Yeah.
I can repeat it. So let's take 2. So my name is Zakia Brisker. I don't have preferred pronouns. That's a whole thing we can go into. I'm the co-captain of South Central Run Club. My devotion in life is to try to establish world peace in real time. And that is, if I'm trying to think if there's anything else, other than that, that's it. I think that sums it up. Oh, if I wasn't here, I mean, this is a pretty dope place to be. If I wasn't here, I would honestly probably be at home with my fiance, eating a good meal, watching Scenes of Marriage, which has been our newest TV show that we've been watching, which is really, really good. It's on HBO. Everybody should watch it. Scenes of Marriage. It's a real good exploration into what it takes for 2 people to really devote to each other over time.
Wow.
So we're all engaged, so it's a thing. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, I'm so glad you're thinking about that before.
Right.
What about you? You want to go?
Yeah, my name is Macario. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a child of immigrants. My family's from Guatemala. And I'm a full-time student right now with Max Unit, so it's a lot. I'm a visual artist, designer, and I've been working with Jasmine and Zakia in the South Central Run Club just as a member, doing other things with them. So yeah.
And where will you be right now?
Catching up with homework. It's my niece's birthday party, so
that sounds good.
Yeah.
Otherwise, stay here.
Yeah.
What about you? Welcome.
Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine Garcia. Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine Garcia. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also a child of immigrants. My family comes from El Salvador, from La Paz and Santana specifically. And if I'm also co-captain with Zakia for the South Central Run Club. And one thing, I have a little bit of social anxiety, and I want to say that up front because one thing that we do, we focus a lot on wellness, and so in thinking about that, I'm realizing that was something that in the past I would see as a weakness. Sometimes I would have to stop myself, feel bad about myself. That's the way I say it up front. Is a form of owning it and just seeing it as part of the conversation versus something that's worked against me. So I wanted to say that, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Put it just right there. Thank you. So you use the word normalizing, and I don't know, it called my attention immediately. And the first question was about community and what is it and how do we grasp that, and what does it take? What does it give? What is your vision of what an ideal South Central community would be beyond world peace, which you want, I know. But like just South Central, what is your vision of that? Can we talk about community again a little bit? Pick up where we left last time. What's your sense? Who wants to?
I think a vision for me for South Central is like really tapping in or activating like a sense of self and being able to realize the people around you and being able to activate other people and tap into the other people. I don't think the problem is that we don't have community. I don't think the problem is that we don't have resources. I think the thing is that we're tied up into certain things that don't serve us. And so I think that community leaders are, to me, essentially people who are like, hey, there's a whole like another thing going on around here that you could tap into that could actually serve you. And I think that's one of the things that we try to focus on in South Central Run Club is basically saying like, hey, you got a dope space here. There's nothing wrong with South Central at all. To the point of like our newest like thing that we've been discussing is like our slogan is South Central is wellness. Because a lot of the times the narrative has been, you know, the colonial powers that be that uses violence to kind of put people in a box. And then they put books in front of your face and they'll say, your community is impoverished. And the only thing that makes that a reality is if you metabolize that and you make it a reality. And so a part of our work is about using communication to show people like, oh, you can look at things differently. You can mobilize differently. You don't have to, and it's not to be like, oh, not one of those situations where it's like, don't be a victim. You know, this is not like one of those situations, but it's a situation where I personally believe that there's a concerted effort to make people feel like they don't have power. That is oppression. Is to make people feel like they don't have the right to inquire, make people feel like they don't have the right to reach for things that they need. And so I think as a community leader, and what will make a perfect South Central is for everybody to feel like they can talk. Everybody can feel like they can step up, they can create spaces, and they can do that. And that there's no longer this, you know, narrative about South Central not having stuff. There's no longer a narrative about South Central, you know, coming from a place of lack, because there's a lot of beautiful things happening in South Central. Like this moment right now is amazing. What the Plant Plug is doing is amazing. What we're doing is amazing. And like the only thing that's stopping us from really shooting off to the moon is, you know, stuff like the McNoyer report or whatever that dude's name was, who did like that report back in the day that basically was talking about how Black people, the single parent households in Black people's lives is what's wrong with Black people, and they can't raise beautiful children. You know, it's those kind of things that comes from the outside that we metabolize it and we realize that fucks things up. Excuse my language. I curse a lot because I come from a space of like, my favorite thing in life is to sediment new things and to transgress and to shake things up. So you'll hear a lot of cursing.
Thank you so much. What about you? What do you guys have to say about community? If you can grab the mic, yes.
Yeah, for me, I was thinking community comes from a lot of like self-identity and like communicating that with like others, and even with this exhibition, I saw parts of myself and like the people exhibited on the portraits, and like the things that they're doing is really inspiring. Just like I think Zuli was the one who did the coloring book with the non-binary child from Guatemala. I'm like, oh my God, I'm crying. Like, I've never heard of this before, and like I find connecting with that is like really amazing. So I think it has to do a lot with like communication, empathy, listening to one another, like the parts that relate to us, but also the parts that we have no connection to either, like the parts that we're not familiar with. You know, with community, you don't know everybody. Not everybody has the exact same like background as you either. So they have different experiences too, how they deal with that. And I think listening to one another, and even with the things that we don't agree with one another is really important, especially with like healing. Yeah,
What before you hand it to her, what do you think about her idea that, because I asked like, what is the South LA community that you envision and that you're striving for? And she said, we already have everything we need, right? That's what you said. Well, you know, you
Not really. I don't think we have everything we need.
but you said that, you know, that there was a need to push against the narrative of lacking resources and lacking power, and that for you there was a lot already there, right? And so that it was about offering everyone the opportunity to realize themselves, right? Which I thought that was really awesome.
I think it was more so that part and like taking up your power. Like it's not like we do need a lot of stuff down here, but because people don't take up their power,
We don't get it.
that's why we have community leaders.
Exactly,
Yeah.
to do it
Right.
for us. Okay, so what do you think about, you know, a vision of South LA now in the future? What's your, specifically about South LA?
Yeah,
And
just to be transparent, I didn't grow up here.
okay,
My
that's
girlfriend, Jasmine is like her sister. Yeah, it want to like offer
Okay.
that space for us.
Yeah, I think for me, the way to answer that question is I think a lot about resiliency and like building our like individual and community capacity for that resilience. Like I think about how diverse South Central is and like rich in cultures, and a lot of us come from different places. And a lot of us have like our family's histories are a lot of our family's histories are tied to struggle and resiliency and revolution, whether it be just within our own personal family, fighting every single day to survive, or rolling out like actual like people uprising with the Black Panther Party, be it the civil movement in the 70s in El Salvador. So we come from really rich histories of our ancestors existing. And so how do we, for me, I think a lot of, I just think about that, and I think about the people that came before us, and like how can we gain energy and strength from that to envision what South Central means for us, because everyone has a different definition of what having a thriving life looks like for them. And so how do we bring in those resources to create a thriving life for everyone? We are very different. We all have different wants and needs. So how do we create that? And so I don't think that I have a definition of what I want South Central to look like. I guess my definition would be creating a space where everyone is able to
to
thrive.
figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And let me leave you with the mic and ask about the women of South Central LA, right? Because that's what this was about, was celebrating women internationally. And you were talking about legacies of struggle again. Like, what do you think about that? What place does the women's movement, the women's struggle, our current reality even, what does that have in South Central LA's history and its current situation, would you say?
Yeah.
Or is that like in your work? How does it come in your work? You wanna go?
I feel like there's so much to say. I feel like I could cry thinking about like the history of women in South Central. And I just think about my own mom, and like, I just have this extreme devotion to my mom because I watched her. I'm the youngest of 5, and I watched her as a single mom have to like endure displacement, like, you know, and we used to live in a house on like Normandy and 53rd. She lost that house. And then we had a stint of homelessness and all that she had to endure in order for her to raise 5 children on her own. And she's a part of a generation of Black and brown mothers who've had to go through that. And I think that, you know, I think about this stuff in like this temporal manner, like that is to say, like, you know, it's all connected to a history, right? And I just think about my own ancestors that were enslaved and what they had to do on the plantations in order to be able to create healthy communities. And so I just really think about how Black and brown women are just this, you know, undergirding foundation to South Central LA that keeps everything afloat. Like without my mom being able to do what she did, I wouldn't be at this panel. Without a lot of the stuff that, you know, Black and brown mothers have to endure, and even sisters, because, you know, my eldest sister is the most dark skinned out of all of us. And so South Central has a collection of different types of cultures that have immigrated here and also have been the product of people who have migrated here with enslaved histories. And so with that comes all of the colonial bullshit that comes with that. It makes me so very angry. And so I think about my sister being the most dark-skinned person in our family and having to go through the specific colorism that she has to go through in order to survive. And so all of those lessons have instilled so much into me. And it's why I feel like I do the work that I do. And I think it's why, like, I think I'm not the only person who feels this way. And I feel like it's the thing that it's almost a fire to a lot of people in South Central. You kind of want to do it for your mama and your sisters and the people who had to struggle in this stupid, fucking oppressive environment that is America.
She loves saying it.
Sorry,
What about you, and even you, like that gender aspect that your mom, like what role do women play in your story, and in particular as we think of your work right now and in this exhibit? You can guess.
Yeah, I mean, like the struggle for, I hate to say it, like the struggle for women is like still so. Yeah, I was thinking that it's like the struggle for like women and like as like a non-binary female, it's like it's just so present still, and there's like so many atrocities still happening like globally too. Could be like within your families, and it's something that is hard to deal with, but it also is very like motivating to feel like doing the work you do.
There you go. Yeah, very good point. Thank you.
I think for me, I also definitely think a lot about the women in my family and like the work that they've had to do to get, so like back in Salvador, just surviving there as foreigners, and then migrating here. My mom was like, she was detained at the border and eventually left for asylum in the 80s. And us building a home here in South Central, and for us it's a beautiful, like for our family it has a lot of significance. And so I think like the strength of the women in my family has been really present in all the work that I do, and all the teachings that and most of the teachings that they've passed on to me. And I want to say most of the teachings, because I also want to highlight that sometimes our cultures can be very just they normalize not accepting people for who they are. And so for me, when I think about pushing back on the patriarchy, it's like it's not just about cis women, it's about non-binary people, about gender non-conforming people, about trans people. It's like when we really talk about how can we move forward, I think like that needs to be included in the conversation. And so for me, that's just something that I think about. It's to really, that's where I really think about that. It's like how when we talk about pushing back against the patriarchy, like how to include everybody, and even cis men who are also affected by not being able to fully develop their emotional selves through being held back by patriarchy.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, as you were talking, I remembered that there is a theory in developmental studies, right? Like about like third world development programs and aids, so-called third world. That the emphasis and the investment has to be made in women, with women, because that is the way that you get it to reproduce whatever investment is done for development, also within quotes, so that it gets to everybody, right? And so if I heard correctly, what you were saying particularly in the end is how do we acknowledge that and that important role that women have as caregivers, right? As being able to think about so many things at the same time, right? Like all those things that we are socialized to do and that play such an important role. So how do we acknowledge that without reproducing the same patriarchal ideas that women, are expected to do and be and all of that? And so we were talking earlier about art and politics, and I wonder how issues of gender or race or all these things come into your work, as you just said, but like again, your standpoints on them, right? Like whether it's gender or race and stuff, like in dealing with these tricky questions of recognition without reproducing the same stuff. Which I think is what you brought up earlier when we were talking about community, and you said, yeah, but community is now mediated by all this stuff. So how do we separate it? So I wanted to explore a little bit more what you think about that in terms of arts and politics.
That was a big question.
It's interesting how the last few projects that I've been working on, like with art and design, have been dealing with like women's rights, and even my personal projects like with photography. Like the last one I explored the trickiness where like I don't want to continue that like stigma on like the identities I carry, especially like being non-binary, having a girlfriend as a female, and it's very tricky. So like how I've dealt with it is just like representing just like me, and then taking that stance for self-representation, because then I realize when I see that in others' work, in other people's work, that's what it really it's so impactful.
Yes.
So that's what I try to focus on.
Wow, excellent. And resolving your own.
Yeah, really self-reflection.
Yeah. Excellent. And as we said in the last panel with the last group, we were talking about how then we see that personal in the political, right? And see the political in our personal struggles. So,
yeah.
Right. So it does reproduce itself. Anybody else wants to reflect on that? Politics, gender, race, art. Or
I think maybe talk a little bit about art, if that's okay.
Please.
One thing that I was going to mention last time when we talked with the question about art and politics, and the question in your answer right now, when you think about like what is my art, and like I think how Taylor was saying earlier about like Carmen being her art, and like I think the most recent place that we express our art is like in the spring of November. We threw I think probably the first 5K ever here in South Central, and it was called the White Supremacy 5K, and so we put that kind of on the forefront of the event because we wanted to make sure that, especially in November, that is usually erases the indigenous genocide that happened, and we celebrate Thanksgiving while erasing all of that. We want to make sure to name that and to also say about white supremacy and the way that's affected our communities here in South Central, all of our communities. And so for us, the way that I saw it as my art, or like an expression of art, was we had that name in the title. That was the message we were running for. At the same time, we did like a really fun event where we had photo booths. We had like celebrating the fact that people ran a 5K in general. Like that's a long distance, and in our own community. You know, it's not just a random racetrack somewhere else. It's in our own community. We had tacos. We had vegan and meat options. We had a DJ, a local DJ. It was just so much fun. We had raffles. Taylor actually raffled off some of her plants. And we had other local vendors raffling and selling stuff. And for me, it was like, we're having this really heavy conversation, but I want to make sure that we're centering our community's joy. Like that we're not giving voice to promoting the center of attention by focusing that and being like we're maybe like 10, like just sad events. Like, I want everyone to have a great time and celebrate themselves and their wins and our community's wins. And so for me, it's like my art. I feel like one of our art pieces where it's like we're tackling this huge issue, but we're making sure that the main thing being seen is art, really people's joy. And that's so for me, that was a piece of art. And then Mac also showed some of their art there too. So
The souls and pieces. Oh, wow. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I've been thinking about this a lot. I mean, it's something that I always, because like on my own time, like I do this, I do South Central Run Club, and I have all of these kind of like wellness projects that I'm doing. But I also write, I do poetry, I do photography. I'm one of those people who just does a lot of different types of art. But like a lot of the stuff that I like to explore is kind of like the cracks in identities. And I also like to explore the ways that communication, our language fails us. And I always try to keep it in perspective through my own self-reflection. Like English is a funny language because it's a culture as well. It's a moving culture, that we're all exchanging all the time. And so I don't try to take too much stock in it, because if I walk around talking about I'm a woman, like what does that really mean in the context of the history of the English language? When you really think about it as somebody with dark skin, that didn't used to apply, especially as an enslaved person. So like that's why I personally claim non-binary, because like when I think about women's rights, it did not become a thing until the white woman decided that she just was like sick of white men. So I'm like, oh, that's y'all fight. That has nothing to do with me. I want to be happy over here. And I just feel like it's because I'm more tripping out. Like I think I always talk to people about, one of my things that I think is most important is just digging our existence. And I think when you start digging out on your existence and really getting more existential, you can really appreciate the people around you, as opposed to getting caught up in the identity wars, which it's great to be able to have the language to describe your nuanced experience, but it's supposed to be a signpost. It's not supposed to be the thing you get caught up on and go to war for. And so I think the more we get too comfortable with our identity constructs, the more divisive we become. And then we just can't even, dig the fact that we are in this really weird miracle right now. And I really want to make that the forefront of my life, because I think in that way I can live a really intentional and present life, because I have that at the forefront. And so a part of my art is really always pointing to that truth of like, what the fuck are we doing here? And like, how is language not good enough to connect us? And like, what could we do more to dig this existence without leaning so much on language? And in regards to like women, I think I have a really complex relationship with the idea of womanhood, just because of what I said before. But I do think that there's a deeper misogyny that we need to address, that everybody is infected by. It's not just men, it's like everybody, no matter what your gender is. And I think that I think it's very tied to the fear of being vulnerable. And so I think a part of like my art and also a part of community building is creating space for the feminine to feel safe.
Exactly.
And so if we can do that on a large scale, that's world peace. And so even though it sounds very lofty when you say just world peace straight out, it's really just about like, can you in yourself create comfort and space for your own feminine being, and then let the space exist for other people? And I think capitalism creates such a momentum that we don't really get the time, or we don't believe, even though we have the time, we don't believe we have the time to create that space for each other or ourselves. And I think a part of my art is reminding people to do that.
Yay! Those were great words. Oh my God, thank you so much. Yes. Wow. I'm still processing. I really appreciate what you said a lot. I appreciate all of your wisdom and your irreverence, because what I got from what you were saying was, that language fixates who we are, right? And like all these definitions do, and how can we disrupt that and center vulnerability, right? Like I do believe that holding each other with that love and that compassion of someone who has discovered our own vulnerabilities is what can bring about world peace, indeed, if we can dream. I wanna, before we are done, give people one final opportunity to contribute to this conversation. Pick up anywhere. You want to say something?
Yeah, I guess I also wanted to say, like, for me, when LA Media and Esperanza Community Housing asked us to participate in this program, one, to like be part of the people being exhibited, but then like ask the three of us to help put it on. For me, immediately, when they asked us to like, if we knew anybody that we thought should also be highlighted, for me, I just thought about all these amazing people, and I was like, just started hitting people up, and I was like, you're amazing, you do amazing work, you need to be highlighted. And I think that's also part of how we make art political. It's like when we have an amazing research, and I think this was also stated in the first panel, it's like when we have an access to such an amazing opportunity where people can be given their flowers that they deserve, like how can we make sure that that it reaches out to all these different people. And so for me, this is also like this event's an expression of that for me. It's like, okay, I was reached out to, how do I make sure that all these amazing people at least get, like, at least know that if they are available, that their work is able to be highlighted, because it's very important. I know, like, I want to highlight Tahira, she's in the audience, and she's also a poet. And there's a few people that also do it fully, and like there's a few people that are not here, but like I just think that that's part of the beauty of creating these spaces, that we all get to meet each other and we get to learn more about what the work that we're doing. Is sometimes like if I thought like make it. For example, maybe I didn't know this one conversation was happening in the community, but it turns out someone is having this conversation. It's an amazing space, and like, okay, how do we create that access for other people to join that space?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is a great way to think about a project like this. Like, if we think of the community as a body, as a mind body, right, as an entity, then bringing oxygen to every part, to every corner, right, like, and having access to all these conversations. Again, we have a few minutes. Anybody, even some of the people that were in the panel before, who want to share?
I actually do want to say that in that vision when
she put together this sort of exhibition exhibit was to bring younger people, young leaders in South Central to life. And I felt that that was really important to do that because it's sad sometimes, right? It's like this world is tough. A lot of stuff is going on that's just like devastating and hard. But as we worked on this project, I kept hearing it in my head, we're gonna be all right.
Oh.
These young leaders, these young women are so amazing.
Yes,
that
they are.
it sort of gets that little lift off the shoulders of like, hey, we're gonna be all right.
Thank you, Yadira.
But I also wanted to say that, yes, my idea was to bring the stories and the images of young women from South LA who are, I'm from another generation, but I remember when I was your age. And I remember how, young people were not really taken into account that much or acknowledged or recognized in any way. But I've been working in South LA for many years, but I must say that I disconnect with the younger generation, with the young women who are continuing these struggles in so many different levels. And so I turn to my colleagues, to my dear friends, Angelica and Sandy, who have been working with me in different art and cultural projects for the last, 5 years. But we know each other since 2010, I think it was, because they came to volunteer at the community center where I used to work, that I used to direct. And she connected, she said, okay, let's go and talk to the South Central runners, the South Central Runners Club. And I said, yeah, and maybe they can help us identify other women in the community. So it's just like the connections and or the project grew very organically. And then as I met you, because we all had sessions here, like an hour and a half, 2 hour session of photos and interviews and going about these stories, and it was just so impressive. And so I want to acknowledge the role that Wikipedia through Angelica and Sandy have provided me, and the connection that I was able to make with you, with Akira. I don't know if Nika is in the audience, Suli, and Celestial, who just left. But there are these just incredible, amazing young women who we didn't know, and now we are connected to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thank you for that, Angelica and Sandy, and I thank you especially
I just want to say one thing because it literally happened last night, and it's just crazy that you just said that. And I think that one of the things to add to the earlier questions about like my vision of South Central, I think is this space and this moment of, I think someone said it earlier about like the intergenerational connection. There was an artist named Noni that died recently. A muralist, brilliant muralist who has a mural, in South Central and Watts, and it really captures the history of Black and Brown people. And she died, and I was like, wow, I never got to meet this person. Like, you could totally tell by her art that we were the same, we rep the same stuff. and to be able to, like, I just want to, like, take a moment to just, like, kind of, like, be in this moment where I'm in this moment with you as a person from an older generation. And even though we might have different ideas about how the way things are going, there's a solidarity and a desire to want to do the best for South Central. And that's really beautiful. And I just wanted to just take that moment to talk about that.
Yes. I agree. Any final? Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to share really quick. Just want to thank everybody who's been part of this exhibition. I think like you guys all, something that I love is, especially being Jasmine Taylor, everybody has really embodied community, because when I talk to Jasmine, she's always like, I want Matt to get involved. When I talk to Taylor, Taylor's like, oh, I can teach people this, And I think that's something that community is about. It's about creating opportunities for each other. It's about preserving the spaces we have. And I think that's something that came up in the interviews. It's like this anchor about gentrification, but the fact that we have this space, I really want to acknowledge Yadira, Nancy, Esperanza, because if you guys look at the history behind this building, that's community too.
That is community.
And we have such a privilege to be able to decorate these walls with the women in our community, and I hope that we can keep that. I trust that we can do that because of the leadership of these women, and it's just like such an amazing experience. I think I'm a very antisocial person, but online, on social media, I don't know why I'm more social. And so we get connected, and then we just kind of just tip off from there. And so I just want to thank everybody who has been part of this process. Thank you, women, because I think I've also been here because some women invested in me.
Exactly.
My mother, Nancy, Yadira, and Angelica, thank you all for being here, for making this possible.
Thank you, Sandy.
Since some things are being mentioned, and I was just kind of waiting for the last few minutes to say, to introduce our very important people. I would like to introduce them now, if it's possible. I'd like to acknowledge two great colleagues that are here from Esperanza Community Housing. Esperanza Community Housing is a nonprofit that created the Mercado La Paloma, and who allows a lot of people who like the arts and the culture and the arts and the craft, we have a lot of events here. And so I first like to acknowledge my dear friend and colleague, Patty Rizzo. My dear colleague, Monique, who has also supported me so much in this. Sandy is, as I am, we all took the training as promotoras de salud, and they don't have to be here because this is not related necessarily, even though everything is intertwined, to this type of work. But they always show up to provide solidarity, to give us solidarity, and so I thank you for that. And then, of course, I wanted to introduce at the beginning, and then I said, I'll introduce her at the very last moment. It's our dear Nancy Abraham. She is our we know each other since 1996.
Wow.
It's a long time, and I want to acknowledge your presence here, Nancy, and your support for all of the work that we do in terms of the arts and culture, in terms of the support for using the stage and using the social Esperanza. And I'd like to give her some time to say a few words.
Thank you so much. I'm just dazzled, actually. Is this a mic? Yeah. Wow, technology. I want to iterate my thanks to Deo, to the panelists, number one, number two, all of you, fantastic women who have brought your wisdom and power into this space. And then Angelica, Sandy, and Jadira also for making this opportunity happen. You mentioned Noni and the murals and the loss of not having happened to know her. There's so many times, and I think we're all exposed to tragedy at this particular time in so many different ways, and the losses that are impacting our lives. There's so many times we feel, if only I had said that, and if only I had met her. And I think just building on one of the things that Angelica said before about the power of what this convening represents, and the power of having young women and young energy and the future in the room, is that this is where we begin not to be jealous of those moments, but actually to activate them. To say, so I would have loved to have met you and I missed that opportunity. I feel that way about all of you. I'd love to spend more time communing, building community, deepening this connection. It is a great privilege to be here with you, but we're also here by right. This is a space that is a free, safe space for our community. This is exactly what we have worked so hard to engender in this space. as a hub, as a place where we are free to have events in Cancobar or Zapotec or Spanish or English or with all the profanity, whatever we need to do to express ourselves safely and wholly, because part of what building community means for me is going back to that sense of coming home to yourself, but also recognizing your home in those connections with other people. So I wasn't planning to be a speaker today. Thank you, Jadida, for putting me. Jadida had actually asked me to make an appeal because Esperanza is an organization that really focuses on a lot of different interconnecting aspects of what whole individuals, whole families are dealing with in South Central LA. It's housing, it's economic development, it's arts and culture, it's health and wellness, and how do we bring all those things together? You had mentioned displacement as a major factor in your personal history. It's also a factor in so many of ours, and this organization was actually founded 32 years ago as a community organizing campaign against displacement, against having families displaced from this community. So there is here a ballot measure that we're going to ask those of you who are voters within the city of Los Angeles. It's only for voters here, but if you are a registered voter in the city of Los Angeles, I would love for you to sign a petition that has been organized by a new coalition called Unite to House. And it is really focused on redistributing the wealth, taxing those millionaires and billionaires who continue to make buck by switching real estate transactions. It will tax those, not those of us who are renters and homeowners of human scale properties, but those owners of properties of $5 million and more. And if they're generating a tax benefit from selling those properties, we want that to benefit housing for all in the city of Los Angeles. So our colleague Rabia Sen, who is our policy director, asked us to not miss the opportunity to invite you who are registered voters in the city of LA to sign on to this. Making sure that we are not displaced is an ongoing struggle for this. I think for Jadida and I have been colleagues for such a long time in an organization that started against displacement, that we are still in a hustle to keep our families, our community whole. So another thing that our community means now is that South Central LA has become very transient. A lot of our people who are being erased for this community are still part of our identity. So this is your home. You're invited to think about other convenings that activate this space and build community from this space. And thank you so much for giving me a space to be part of this program today. It's been absolutely profound. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We have the retratos for all of you to take home because some really are leaving the retratos there and don't forget those.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, it was my honor, and I think all of our treat to learn so much from, as you were saying, right, the newer generation, the people that we say, how is that saying? Like, we are the ones we've been waiting for, right? So I think that's a great way to end. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the moderation.